sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into a story that's really got everyone buzzing: President Trump and Elon Musk's wild government makeover.
Yeah, it's certainly been a whirlwind of activity.
For sure. We've got a whole stack of articles here, and let me tell you, it's like someone hit the fast forward button on Washington.
It's been a rapid and dramatic shift, no doubt about that, with changes happening across the board from spending limits to agency overhauls.
Yeah, and the speed is what's really catching everyone's attention. One article even compared it to like a Silicon Valley startup, move fast and break things kind of vibe.
Yeah.
But governing a country isn't quite the same as launching the next big app, is it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The administration argues these changes are all about streamlining government and cutting costs, but critics are worried about potential chaos and unintended consequences.
Right. Well, let's start with the big question, the Musk in the room. He's at the center of this whole thing, even though he's never held public office before. So what exactly is his role, and why is everyone making such a fuss about it?
Officially, his title is presidential advisor, but his influence seems to go way beyond that. He's been a very vocal advocate for these government reforms, and a lot of people see him as the driving force behind this new department, the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, as they're calling it.
DOGE. So this department, it's basically tasked with making the government run more like a well-oiled machine. Right? It sounds like they've been given a lot of power, especially with all these new spending limits for agencies like the EPA needing DOGE approval for any contract over $50,000. Isn't that a lot of control for a brand new department?
It's a significant amount of authority for sure, and it's raising concerns about potential bottlenecks and, political influence creeping into decisions that should be based on, objective criteria. And that's just one example. We're seeing workforce reductions being planned across multiple agencies like the VA, the IRS, even the Social Security Administration.
Well, those are agencies that millions of Americans depend on. What are people saying about the impact of these cuts, especially for the people who rely on those services?
Well, there's a lot of anxiety out there, particularly among federal workers who are facing potential job losses. A lot of them feel like their dedication and their public service is being overlooked in this rush to shrink the government. We're also seeing protests popping up all over the country with people voicing concerns about essential services being affected and whether political motivations are really driving these decisions.
You mentioned political motivations. There's been a lot of talk about Trump using executive orders to push these changes through. Can you explain how that works and why it's causing such a stir?
Sure. So executive orders are basically directives from the president that carry the weight of law without needing approval from Congress. Presidents have used them throughout history, but Trump's been particularly reliant on them to get his agenda moving forward. One example is the executive order that requires all agencies to overhaul their payment systems so that DOGE can monitor them.
Hold on. So DOGE is going to be overseeing how every government agency spends money. That sounds like a massive undertaking, and it definitely raises questions about conflicts of interest, especially with all the concerns about Musk's level of influence.
Exactly. Some critics, like Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, argue that giving so much power to what they call an unvetted, inexperienced team could open the door to improper external influence on agency decisions.
Okay, so we've got a powerful new department tasked with making the government more efficient, potential job losses and service cuts, concerns about political motivations and conflicts of interest. Sounds like there are two sides to this story for sure.
Absolutely. The administration argues that these changes are necessary to cut waste and make the government run more smoothly, while critics worry about disruption, reduced service quality, and undue political influence seeping into everything.
And then there's the Pentagon, where it seems like things are getting hit particularly hard. One article mentioned Pentagon employees having their credit card limits slashed to $1. It's almost symbolic, but I imagine it's causing a lot of headaches for people just trying to do their jobs.
It definitely highlights the challenges that federal workers are facing in this new environment. It's a pretty drastic measure. And there's been a lot of pushback. And speaking of pushback, another agency that's facing a lot of scrutiny is the TSA.
Right, the TSA. What's happening over there?
Well, the administration has revoked union protections for TSA workers, which is fueling concerns about potential layoffs or even the privatization of airport security altogether.
Wow, privatization of airport security. That would be a huge shift in how we approach national security. Yeah. What are the arguments for and against that kind of move?
Well, proponents of privatization argue that it could lead to increased efficiency and, you guessed it, cost savings.
It seems like that's the theme here, efficiency and cost savings. But are those the only things we should be considering when we're talking about essential services like airport security?
That's a valid point. Critics argue that security shouldn't be driven solely by profits. They're worried about corners being cut and a lack of accountability that can sometimes come with private contractors.
This is all so fascinating, but it's a lot to digest. We've covered a lot of ground already, from the creation of DOGE to the changes happening at the EPA, the Pentagon, the TSA. It seems like no agency is immune to this overhaul. What I'm really curious about is the impact on everyday Americans. How are these changes playing out in people's lives?
That's a great question, and it's one we're going to dig into as we continue this deep dive.
Okay, I'm ready to keep going, but before we do, I think it's important to acknowledge that we're dealing with a lot of different perspectives here.
For sure, there are very strong opinions on both sides of this issue, and it's crucial to understand all the different arguments and concerns.
Right, so as we get into the details, we'll make sure to present a balanced view of everything, exploring the potential benefits and drawbacks of all these changes. We'll also hear from the people who are being directly affected by these reforms, so you can get a sense of the real-world impact of this whole government makeover.
It's a developing story, and the full implications are still unfolding.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, let's continue our deep dive into this unprecedented government overhaul.
So before the break, we were talking about the wide-reaching impact of all these changes, and maybe no agency highlights those impacts better than the Social Security Administration.
Yeah, Social Security, it's something that touches the lives of so many Americans, particularly retirees, and those planning for their future. What are the specific changes on the table there, and what kind of pushback are we seeing?
Well, there's a lot of talk about streamlining the agency, which could mean a lot of things, from staff reductions to simplifying benefit calculations. But the biggest concern out there is the possibility of benefit cuts, even though President Trump has said he won't touch them.
It seems like a contradiction, right? On one hand, he's promising to protect Social Security benefits, but on the other, we're seeing these potential cuts to the very agency that administers them. How do people make sense of that?
It's causing a lot of uncertainty and anxiety, especially among older Americans who really depend on Social Security as their main source of income. There's this feeling that the administration is trying to have it both ways, claiming to protect benefits while making it harder for the agency to actually deliver them.
And that uncertainty isn't helped by situations like what happened in Maine, right? That whole mess with the Social Security numbers for newborns really threw people off.
Oh, absolutely. For those who didn't catch that, the administration actually stopped issuing Social Security numbers for newborns in Maine for a while, citing concerns about voter fraud.
Which seemed like a pretty weak excuse, especially since Maine has a long history of clean elections. It felt like they were trying to punish a state that didn't vote the way the president wanted.
That was definitely the impression a lot of people got, and it led to a lot of outrage and legal challenges. In the end, the administration backtracked and started issuing the numbers again, but the whole thing left a bad taste in people's mouths.
It raised some serious questions about whether politics were influencing decisions that should be completely neutral, and it shows what can happen when changes are made so quickly that it's hard to keep up.
That's a big concern we're hearing a lot. The speed of these changes is leaving a lot of people feeling overwhelmed and unsure of what to expect. It's like trying to pin down a moving target.
And it's not just the speed, it's the whole approach. This move fast and break things mentality might work in Silicon Valley, but it seems a bit risky when you're talking about systems that affect millions of people's lives.
That's a major criticism of Elon Musk's involvement. A lot of people praise his innovative thinking and focus on efficiency. But others say governing isn't the same as running a tech company experience, and understanding of complex bureaucratic systems are crucial, and those are things Musk's critics say he just doesn't have.
So it's like a tug of war between wanting fast, dramatic change and the need for careful planning and expertise. It seems like a high-wire act with really big stakes.
Absolutely, and the stakes get even higher when you consider the legal challenges that are popping up against these reforms. Groups like the State Democracy Defenders Fund are arguing that many of these changes are actually unconstitutional, and they're actively working to get them reversed.
Can you tell us more about those legal challenges? What are their main arguments, and do they have a shot at winning?
Well, one of their main arguments is about Elon Musk's role. He has a lot of influence, but he hasn't been confirmed by the Senate for any official government position. Some legal experts say this raises concerns about accountability and transparency, and it could be enough to overturn some of these changes.
So there's a legal battle brewing over whether these reforms are even being done the right way. It just adds another layer of complication to an already messy situation.
It does, and it highlights why it's so important to understand the legal rules surrounding these changes. Executive orders are powerful, but they're not unlimited. There are checks and balances to make sure the president's power isn't being abused.
So even if the president has the authority to make these orders, their legality can still be challenged in court, and the outcome of those legal battles could really change the future of these reforms.
Exactly. It's a very fluid situation, and it's important to stay informed about the latest developments.
Speaking of staying informed, I'm curious to hear what people on the ground are saying about all this. We've heard from experts and legal analysts, but what about the everyday Americans who are actually being affected by these changes?
That's a great point to really understand the impact. We need to hear from the people who are experiencing it firsthand. There are stories coming out from all over the country, federal workers facing layoffs, families worried about cuts to essential services. It's important to hear their voices.
I can only imagine the stress and uncertainty they're going through.
Yeah.
It's one thing to read about it in the news, but it's another to live it.
It is, and those personal stories really drive home the human cost of these policy decisions. It's easy to get lost in the political back and forth and legal arguments, but we can't forget that real people's lives are at stake.
Absolutely. We need to keep that human element front and center as we continue this conversation. So as we keep going, we'll be sure to highlight the stories of the people who are navigating this new landscape and share their perspectives on what it means for them and their communities.
It's such an important perspective to bring into this whole discussion, and it leads to another crucial part of this government overhaul that we haven't really touched on yet, the impact on the economy.
Oh, right. With potential job losses across all these agencies and changes to how government contracts are awarded, there's bound to be a ripple effect across the whole economy.
Exactly. Some economists are saying these reforms could actually boost economic growth by cutting government spending and making regulations less complicated. They believe a smaller, more efficient government will create a better environment for businesses to grow.
But there's also the risk of job losses and economic hardship, especially in areas that depend heavily on government contracts or have a lot of federal workers.
That's the flip side. Critics say these cuts could actually lead to a recession, since government spending plays a big role in economic activity. They also worry about income inequality getting worse because people with lower incomes tend to rely more on government services and jobs.
Seems like there are valid points on both sides. So how do we balance the potential benefits of economic growth against the risks of job losses and economic hardship?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a complicated issue with no easy answers. The economic impact of these reforms is going to depend on a lot of different factors, like the specific policies, how well the economy is doing overall, and how the government responds to any negative consequences.
So we're left with a lot of unknowns. It's like sailing into uncharted territory, and we're all trying to figure out what's ahead.
I think that's a great way to put it, and it shows how important it is to stay informed, have open discussions, and make sure our leaders are accountable for the decisions they're making.
It's a lot to take in, but I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's so important to break down these complicated issues and understand all the different sides.
I completely agree, and as we move forward, I think we need to remember that this government overhaul is more than just a bunch of policy changes. It's about a fundamental shift in how we think about the role of government in our lives.
That's an interesting point. So it's not just about efficiency or saving money. It's about a deeper philosophical question about the relationship between the government and its citizens.
Exactly. And that debate is likely to keep going long after all the specifics of these reforms are settled. It's a conversation that's been going on for as long as our country has existed, and it's one that we all need to be a part of.
Well said. And that brings up another key question. What does all this mean for the future? If this government overhaul actually works, in whatever way we define works, what kind of government will we end up with? Will it be more efficient, more responsive to what people need, or will it be something completely different?
Those are the questions we should be asking, and I think the answers will depend on the choices we make as a society. We have a chance to shape the future of our government, but it takes an informed and engaged public to make that happen.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface of this huge topic. There's so much more to unpack, and I'm sure the story is going to have a lot more twists and turns as it develops.
I agree. It's a constantly changing situation, and it's crucial to keep up with the latest developments.
So before we wrap up, I want to turn it back to you, our listener.
Right.
We've presented a lot of information and different points of view, but ultimately it's up to you to decide what you believe.
That's right. We encourage you to keep learning about these issues, asking questions, and talking about them with your friends, family, and community.
Because at the end of the day, the future of our government is in our hands. We've been really digging into this huge government shakeup, and man, it's been quite the journey. We've gone from Elon Musk's oversized role to the ins and outs of DOGE, from worries about Social Security to the potential ripple effects on the economy. That's a lot to process.
It certainly is, and you've hit on a key point. This isn't just about individual agencies or policies. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about the role of government itself.
So let's talk about that. What exactly is this philosophical shift, and why should our listeners care?
Well, for decades, there's been this ongoing debate about how big and how involved the government should be on one side. You have people who believe in a strong government that actively provides services, regulates industries, and takes care of social welfare. And then on the other side, you have those who want a smaller, less hands-on government. They argue that this approach promotes individual freedom and economic growth.
And it sounds like this current overhaul is pushing us more towards that smaller government model, right?
Exactly. The focus on efficiency, cutting costs, and shrinking the federal workforce definitely aligns with that philosophy. The big question is, what do we have to give up to get there?
That's what I keep wondering about. Efficiency sounds good on paper, but does it always lead to better outcomes for people?
That's the core of the debate. Take the EPA, for example. Streamlining their permitting processes might sound efficient, but if it means weaker environmental protections, is that a trade-off we're willing to make?
That's a tough one. And the same goes for something like the TSA privatizing airport security might save money, but are we putting safety and oversight at risk?
These are the kinds of questions we all need to be thinking about as we watch this overhaul unfold. And it's not just about finding the right answers. It's about having an informed public that can weigh the pros and cons and hold their leaders accountable.
So where does this leave us, and what can our listeners do to stay involved in this whole thing?
This government makeover is a story that's still being written. The changes are coming fast, legal challenges are popping up, and we don't really know what the long-term effects will be. The most important thing is that we as citizens stay informed, have these discussions, and make our voices heard.
What does that look like, practically speaking?
It could mean staying up to date on the news from a variety of sources, reaching out to your elected officials to express your concerns, or joining community organizations that are fighting for policies you believe in.
So it's about being an active participant in shaping the future of our government, not just sitting back and watching it happen.
Exactly. And remember, there's no one right way to get involved.
Yeah.
The important thing is finding what works for you and taking action.
This has been a truly deep dive, and we've covered a ton of information, but before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Go for it.
If this government overhaul really is a shift towards a smaller, more efficient model, what does that mean for all the services and programs that so many Americans depend on? Will those services be able to adapt and thrive in this new environment? Or will they struggle to survive?
That's a great question to leave everyone with. And it's a reminder that this isn't just about abstract political ideas. It's about real people's lives and the communities they rely on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll keep following this story and let you know about any new developments.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're Bobby doll. Show them all